There are talented politicians, there are untalented politicians, and then there's J.D. Vance. I mean, he tried to calm the furor over his childless cat lady's remarks by feebly deadpanning that he's got nothing against cats. Now he's just gaslighting, claiming that Kamala Harris called for an end to the child tax credit, even though as part of the Biden administration. She of course supported a major expansion of the tax credit that greatly reduced child poverty, but expired in 2022 in the face of unified Republican opposition. So how did this guy end up as the Republican vice presidential nominee? Who's his constituency? Despite the Handmaid's Tale vibe of his views on women and reproductive rights, he doesn't have deep roots in the religious right. And he's a late adopter of the MAGA worldview, having once fretted that Donald Trump could wind up being America's Hitler. Vance's ascent has, to a significant degree, been powered by a small group of technology billionaires with Peter Thiel, who poured millions into Vance's 2020 Senate race, at the center. There's clearly overlap between this coterie and the tech types who a year ago briefly swooned over Robert Kennedy Jr. Their enthusiasm for Kennedy seems to have waned as they've realized the obvious, that he's a crank who could still play the role of spoiler, but not a serious presidential contender in his own right. On the other hand, the elevation of Vance, who seems to be a worse politician than even his detractors realized, looks harder to reverse. While it's technically still possible to replace Vance on the G.O.P. ticket, Trump is probably stuck with him. In any case, you really want to think of Vance as an avatar, not of hillbillies, as the title of his memoir would have you believe, but of tech brothers. Now, it would be misleading to suggest that Vance represents all of Silicon Valley. His boosters, and in general, the tech billionaires who strongly support the Trump-Vance ticket, are a relatively small, if immensely wealthy group. So, what do they have in common? To start, right-wing political leanings. Some used to present themselves as libertarians, but they've now made their peace with Trump, who, with his promises of mass deportations and his hints that he will prosecute political opponents, is anything but libertarian. Some right-wing techies have also descended into conspiracism. Leading the pack, Elon Musk has taken to promoting false claims that Democrats refuse to deport illegal immigrants because they expect to receive their votes. In general, as I've noted in the past, paranoid politics comes surprisingly naturally to the ultra-wealthy, and not just in the tech sector. Partly that's because it's hard for some billionaires to avoid surrounding themselves with people unwilling to tell them when they're talking nonsense. Partly it's because some seem to feel a peculiar sense of grievance over the things money can't buy. If I'm so rich, why can't I shape the world to my liking? Tech Bro's support for Trump and Vance also seems to have a lot to do with one specific issue: cryptocurrency. In 2017, the pro-Trump tech mogul David Sacks, who had a prime speaking slot at the Republican National Convention this month, told CNBC that Bitcoin is fulfilling PayPal's original vision to create the new world currency. Last year, Thiel's Founders Fund invested $100 million into cryptocurrencies. Also last year, Politico reports, Vance introduced a bill that would shield banks from regulatory pressure to cut off crypto customers. This year, he circulated industry-friendly draft legislation that would overhaul how the SEC and the CFTC police the crypto market. What is crypto? On Saturday, Trump, addressing a Bitcoin conference, declared, "Most people have no idea what the hell it is," which is true, and almost surely applies to Trump himself, who once dismissed Bitcoin as a scam against the dollar, but now says that the attacks on crypto are coming from left-wing fascists. The truth is that Bitcoin, which was introduced 15 years ago, an eon in tech time, remains economically useless. A 2020 survey found that transactions involving crypto assets are seldom used for payments outside the crypto ecosystem. A couple of exceptions to its uselessness are money laundering and extortion. But many crypto boosters now appear to believe that with Trump, they have crucial political support. They've already managed to get key parts of their wish list inserted into the 2024 Republican Party platform. Republicans will end Democrats' unlawful and un-American crypto crackdown and oppose the creation of a central bank digital currency. Strange stuff to include in a fairly short document, presumably aimed at voters, when I'm sure only a tiny handful of voters have the slightest idea what any of that is about. At Saturday's conference, Trump appeared to go even further than his party's platform, calling for the creation of some form of national Bitcoin reserve, a government bailout for a scandal-ridden, value and environment-destroying industry. Oh, and on Monday, Vance is slated to headline a fundraiser at the home of Mike Belch, the chief executive of BitGo, a digital asset company. Anyway, the backing of tech billionaires is a key reason we ended up with Vance as a vice presidential contender. He pitches himself as a champion of working-class America. But behind his cynical culture warring, behind his professed allegiance to everyman totems like Mountain Dew, he's closely tied to a tech sector ethos that's anything but populist. Though Republican vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance's remarks about the U.S. being run by a bunch of childless cat ladies are a few years old, the comments have been going viral since former press. Donald Trump chose the Ohio senator as his running mate for the 2020 presidential election last week. The statements, made during a Tucker Carlson Tonight interview that aired on Fox News in July 2021, have riled up people on both sides of the aisle and sparked backlash from celebrities including Jennifer Aniston, Whoopi Goldberg, and her The View co-host Alyssa Farah Griffin. We are effectively run in this country by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable, too, Vance told Carlson. It's just a basic fact. You look at Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children. He added, and how does it make any sense that we've turned our country over to people who don't really have a direct stake in it? Vice President Harris, whom President Joe Biden backed as the Democratic presidential nominee, is a stepmother to husband Douglas Emhoff's children with ex-wife Kirsten Emhoff, Cole, and Ella Emhoff. U.S. Transportation Secretary Buttigieg and his husband, Chasen, welcomed twins Penelope Rose and Joseph August in September 2021. You may have heard about J.D. Vance's childless cat ladies riff. But even if you have, it's worth revisiting the full quote and reminding yourself of what it says about the movement that may wind up in charge of this country after this year's election. In 2021, while running for the Senate, Vance explained what he saw as one of the biggest problems facing America. It's being run by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable. 2. He name-checked, among others, Vice President Kamala Harris. It's a statement, as my colleague Jessica Gross writes, that shows the desperation of Republicans who are still clinging to the tagline that the G.O.P. is the pro-family party. But even for a red state Senate candidate, this was a remarkably harsh and conspiracy-minded insult to a large number of people. Around 1/6 of American women 40 to 44 have never had children. It's the kind of comment that makes you wonder if Vance thinks that he has been nominated by the Republican Party to serve as the Vice President of the Republic of Gilead. Sorry, yes, Vance knows that our nation is still called the United States of America. But there's a real Handmaid's Tale vibe to a lot of what we're hearing from the right. First, my main point, as Vance's statement illustrates, many people who call themselves conservatives, and who, routinely, as Donald Trump did on Wednesday, accuse moderately center-left Democrats like Harris of being radical, are actually the real radicals. That is, they seemingly can't stand America as it is and want to transform it back into a kind of society we haven't been for generations. This is especially true when it comes to gender roles. Modern America is by no means free of sexism. It is, however, a society that offers women far more freedom to choose their paths in life than societies of the past. And it has been that kind of society for a long time. As Claudia Golden, who received the 2023 Nobel in Economic Science, has documented, there was a quiet revolution in women's roles beginning around 1970, one that greatly expanded their life choices, allowing many to pursue careers as well as or instead of traditional paths. Indeed, almost 3/4 of women ages 25 to 54 were in the paid workforce by the end of the Reagan administration, close to the proportion today. Oh, and Roe v. Wade became the law of the land in 1973. In other words, women's expanded role was already well established by 1985, when Margaret Atwood published The Handmaid's Tale, a novel about the possibility of a violent backlash undoing the gains women had achieved. That was almost 40 years ago at this point. Most Americans have never known a society in which womanhood is narrowly defined by homemaking and child-rearing, in which women who haven't had children are considered strange and inferior. But Vance, whose political career has been shaped to a large extent by his opposition to abortion rights, is trying to turn the clock back half a century or more. And he's not alone. Trump continues to try to distance himself from the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025. But his efforts really only started once Democrats began making the project an issue and polls began showing growing public awareness of and disapproval of what it contains. In reality, Trump, with his evident lack of interest in the nuts and bolts of public policy, would almost certainly be okay without sourcing much policymaking to right-wing think tanks like Heritage. So the project's proposals give us a good look at how a second Trump administration might govern if given a free hand. And while the overarching takeaway about the project is that it's a blueprint for authoritarian rule, it would, in particular, represent a giant step backward for women. True, the project's mandate for leadership document avoids calling for a national abortion ban, but it contains a number of recommendations aimed at curtailing reproductive rights. Of these, the creepiest is its assertion that the C.D.C.'s abortion surveillance and maternity mortality reporting systems are woefully inadequate, followed by this, because liberal states have now become sanctuaries for abortion tourism. H.S. should use every available tool, including the cutting of funds, to ensure that every state reports exactly how many abortions take place within its borders, at what gestational age of the child, for what reason, the mother's state of residence, and by what method. Serious Gilead vibes. As I see it, one of the great virtues of modern America is the freedom it offers its citizens to decide for themselves how to live their lives, a freedom, ironically, that Republicans used to tout all the time. And I see the increase in women's freedom, including the protection of their right to decide whether to have children, as something that benefits all of us, men included. But there are many people like Vance who want to limit or even take away that freedom. "We are not going back" has already emerged as perhaps the key slogan of Harris's presidential campaign. But depending on how this election turns out, we may indeed be going back way back.